There was nothing dangerous about what she was doing. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she was in her own backyard, on her knees in the garden, pulling weeds and clearing out old growth the way she did most weekends. At some point, a dry stick caught the back of her hand and left a small scratch. It barely bled. She rinsed it off at the outdoor faucet, went inside, put a bandage on it, and got back to her afternoon. That was the whole event. There was nothing exotic about it. No wild animal, no dirty needle, no tropical disease. Just a woman, a garden, and a scratch from a stick. 8 days later, she would be lying in an intensive care unit, unable to open her mouth, with her spine arching backward against her will. The thing that makes this story so unsettling isn't how rare the setting is. It's how ordinary it is. Countless people did almost exactly what she did that weekend. Gardening is one of the most common hobbies in America, and getting a small cut or scrape while you do it is so normal that nobody even registers it as an injury. You nick your hand on a thorn, a stick, or a shard of an old pot, you clean it, and you move on. She did everything. A reasonable person does. She washed the scratch, she covered it, she didn't ignore it. If you'd asked her that evening whether she was worried, she probably would have laughed. Why would she be? It was a scratch in her backyard. There was only one thing she didn't know, and it wasn't visible anywhere on her hand. It was buried in her medical history. She had not had a tetanus booster in 14 years. She wasn't against vaccines. She wasn't careless. Like a huge number of adults, she simply had no idea that the tetanus shot you get as a kid isn't a one-time thing, and that the protection quietly fades over the years. That single gap was about to matter more than anything else in her life. To understand what happened next, you have to know what lives in soil. Not exotic soil, not jungle soil, the plain dirt in an Oklahoma backyard, and in gardens all across the United States. It's a bacterium called Clostridium tetani, and it survives out in the environment as tough little spores that can sit in the ground for years, just waiting. Those spores are basically harmless in the open air because they can't grow where there's oxygen, but push them below the skin into a wound where the oxygen runs low, and they wake up. A deep puncture is the classic danger, but even a small scratch with a little dirt worked into it can be enough. The stick that caught her hand did two things at once. It broke the skin, and it carried spores in underneath it. Once they start growing inside the wound, the bacteria produce a toxin, and that toxin is the entire reason tetanus is so feared. It's one of the most powerful neurotoxins known to science. And it doesn't just cause a local infection you could drain or clean out. It travels. The toxin creeps up along her nerve fibers, moving from the wound toward her spinal cord and brainstem, heading straight for the control center of her nervous system. When it arrives, it does something cruel. Your muscles are normally kept in balance by signals that tell them when to relax. This toxin switches those calming signals off. So the muscles keep getting the order to contract, and nothing ever tells them to stop. They clench, and they stay clenched, and they seize. And this is the part that makes tetanus a nightmare to treat. Once that toxin locks onto the nerves, there is no antidote that can pull it back off. No drug reverses it. All the doctors can do is keep you alive and sedated while your body slowly, over weeks, grows the nerve endings back. One more thing makes tetanus so easy to underestimate. It doesn't hit right away, and it doesn't spread from person to person. There's usually a gap of several days to a couple of weeks between the wound and the first symptom, which is more than enough time to completely forget the tiny injury that started it. By the time the body finally sounds the alarm, most patients have no memory of the moment that mattered. Some doctors call it a disease of the wound you already forgot about. For the first few days after her afternoon in the garden, she felt completely fine. The toxin was already on its way. On day 5, the first sign appeared, and it was easy to brush off. Her jaw felt stiff, tight, like she'd been clenching it in her sleep or coming down with a bug. She figured she'd slept on it wrong, and she went about her day. By day 6, it was harder to explain away. She could barely open her mouth wide enough to eat comfortably. The stiffness had turned into a real tightness, a resistance, as if the muscles of her jaw had decided on their own to stay closed. She still wasn't thinking about that scratch. Almost nobody would. The garden was 6 days and a lifetime of normal moments ago. On day 7, her face started doing things she wasn't asking it to do. Small spasms tugged at the muscles around her mouth and cheeks. There's a specific eerie version of this that doctors watch for, where the tightening muscles pull the face into a fixed, involuntary grimace that can look almost like a forced smile. It even has a name that captures how unsettling it is: the sardonic smile. Eating became a struggle. Talking felt wrong. A low fear began to build, the kind you feel when your own body stops following orders and you can't understand why. She still had no reason to connect any of it to a garden a week earlier, and that disconnect is exactly what makes tetanus so dangerous. The clue and the crisis are separated by just enough time to look completely unrelated. And on day 8, her jaw locked completely. She physically could not open her mouth. The medical term for it is trismus, but everyone knows it by its older, more frightening name: lockjaw. That was the moment the fear became a full emergency, and she was rushed to the hospital. There's something strange about diagnosing tetanus in an emergency room. There is no blood test that confirms it. It's diagnosed on site, from the story and the symptoms. So when the doctor saw a locked jaw, learned she'd had an outdoor wound about a week earlier, and found out she hadn't had a tetanus booster in over a decade, the diagnosis took roughly 30 seconds. 3 facts, and they knew exactly what they were looking at. The problem was that knowing what it was couldn't undo what the toxin had already done. She was admitted straight to the intensive care unit because everyone treating her understood how bad this could get. They gave her tetanus antitoxin, a treatment that hunts down and neutralizes any toxin still floating loose in her body that hasn't reached the nerves yet. It's an important step, and it can stop things from getting worse. But it comes with a brutal limitation. It does nothing about the toxin that is already bound to her nervous system. That portion is locked in, and it is going to run its course no matter what anyone does. In other words, the damage already in motion couldn't be undone by any drug. From that point on, the goal was simply to keep her alive long enough to get through it. So the team prepared for the part of tetanus that most people have never heard of and never forget once they have. Because lockjaw, as awful as it sounds, is only the beginning. Tetanus doesn't stop at the face. It works its way down and takes over the large, powerful muscles of the body, and when it reaches the muscles of the back, it produces something that looks almost impossible to believe. Before I show you what that looks like, take 1 second and hit the subscribe button, because a new case like this one goes up on this channel every week. And if you have kids, or you garden, or you just have skin, the next part is exactly why this video is worth sharing. Now, back to the intensive care unit. As the toxin took hold of the muscles running along her spine, her back began to arch. Not a little. The powerful muscles on either side of the spine are stronger than the ones in front of them. So when everything contracts at once, the whole body bends backward. During the worst spasms, she would lock into a rigid backward bow, her head and her heels straining toward each other, while every muscle screamed. Doctors have a name for this one too: opisthotonus. And these spasms are not gentle. They can be violent enough to tear muscle and even crack the bones of the spine. Some tetanus patients fracture their own vertebrae through nothing more than the force of their own bodies. There was no way she could stay conscious through that. So the team did the only thing that works. They sedated her deeply, placed a breathing tube down her throat, and connected her to a ventilator to breathe for her. Because tetanus can seize up the very muscles you use to breathe and quietly suffocate you. Then they kept her that way, sedated and supported, shielded from noise and light and touch, since even a small disturbance can trigger another full-body spasm. And they waited. Not for a cure, because there isn't one. They waited for her own nerves to slowly regrow the endings the toxin had destroyed, which is the only way anyone ever recovers from this. It took about 3 weeks in intensive care. 3 weeks of a machine breathing for her while her nervous system rebuilt itself cell by cell. Then, slowly, the spasms grew weaker. The rigidity started to ease. Her body remembered how to relax. She survived, which, with modern intensive care, most tetanus patients now do. But surviving was not the same as walking away untouched. When she finally came off the sedation and the ventilator, she was weak in a way that's hard to picture. Weeks of total muscle rigidity, followed by weeks of forced stillness, leaves the body wrecked. She needed physical therapy to rebuild strength she used to take for granted, to walk steadily again, to do ordinary things with a body that had spent nearly a month at war with itself. And there's one more detail that catches almost everyone off guard. Surviving tetanus does not make you immune to it. She would still need to be vaccinated, because the disease itself teaches your body nothing that would protect you the next time. And this is where the story stops being just a scare and starts being useful. Every bit of what she went through was preventable, and the prevention is almost insultingly simple. Adults are supposed to get a tetanus booster every 10 years, not once as a child. Every 10 years for the rest of your life. And a large share of American adults have no idea that clock is even running, which means plenty of people walking around right now are quietly unprotected in the exact situation she was. The reason so many people think tetanus is extinct is actually the vaccine's own success. It's been knocked down so far, so consistently, for so long, that it slipped out of the public imagination entirely. But the bacteria never left. They're still sitting in the soil, exactly where they've always been. The only thing that changed is us, and specifically, how many of us have quietly let our protection lapse without noticing. The numbers back this up in a way that's hard to ignore. Between 2009 and 2023, the CDC recorded a little over 400 tetanus cases in the United States, and 37 of those people died. Tetanus is rare now, and that is genuinely good news. But among the patients whose vaccination history was known, close to half had never received a tetanus vaccine at all, and most of the rest had gotten their last dose more than 10 years before they got sick. And one detail should end the argument. Among the people who were fully vaccinated, there were no deaths. The shot works that well. The only people this disease is still killing are the ones it can still reach. So the takeaway from this one costs you nothing. Go find out when you last had a tetanus shot. Check an old record. Ask your doctor. Dig up a chart from years ago. If it has been more than 10 years, or you honestly can't remember, then you already have your answer. It happened in her backyard. Not on a battlefield, not in a rusty junkyard, not on some trip to a faraway country. In the same kind of garden that sits behind millions of American homes, from a scratch that barely bled. That is what makes this one stay with you. There was no exotic danger to avoid, and no dramatic mistake to point to. The only thing standing between an ordinary afternoon and 3 weeks in an ICU was a booster shot she didn't know she needed. If this made you want to go check your own vaccination record, then it did its job. And I'd honestly appreciate a like, because it helps this reach the next person who's overdue and has no idea. And subscribe, because every week I break down another real case where the human body becomes the most terrifying story there is. And if you want to see how another small cut, this time in a warm Louisiana bayou, nearly cost a man his arm in a single day, that case is on screen right now. Go watch it.